Okay.
Governors are beginning to soften their stance on President Bola Tinubu's tax reform bills. Nasarawa State Governor Abdullahi Sule mentioned that if they had been informed earlier about the proposed 60% VAT distribution model for better equity, their opposition might have been less intense. The reform, which aims to address VAT imbalances and multiple taxation, now exempts vulnerable Nigerians from personal income tax, shifting the burden to higher earners. Clarifications provided during the town hall by Taiwo Oyodele, chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy, emphasized that the new VAT model would allocate 60% based on supply and consumption, promoting fairness. Concerns about dissolving agencies like Naseni and TETFund were dismissed. Supporters, including former Speaker Yakubu Dogara, have praised the reforms for their potential to increase revenues, especially in the north, through sectors like livestock and minerals. The discussion has suggested the governors may reconsider the oppositions in light of this clarification. What's your take on this story, Mr. Benson?
Well, first and foremost, what is the idea of tax? Tax is to generate resources or revenue, and to ensure that you take care of the basic needs of the people. You know, that is the broader need for tax. Now, we are talking about tax reform. I think the elements around the tax reform, they are not too clear because we are just looking at the small segment. We have not seen a broader document that is showing the various phases and how it works, because they are talking about base consumption, supply, and consumption in the resident place, we earn that 60% VAT. But if you look at supply and consumption, there are two different things. Because you can supply without having consumption taking place. And again, we must look at the bigger picture, because most often we have policy that will tell you certain amount of revenue will come out from those policies that will help them to govern well and meet up with the needs of the common man. But that hasn't been the case. We have a recent one around the subsidy thing. We don't know where the money from the subsidy, what is being used for at the moment. Now we are talking about tax reform. In as much as whatever the government comes up with that is in the right direction, we applaud it. But we want to know these policies that are coming up, how do they really translate into something we can see and experience and feel as a people? So for me, the whole idea of the tax reform, it is not a bad one, but there are certain things that should come first before we start talking about tax reform. For example, if you look at the cost of governance, it's very high at the moment. They should be able to adjust cost aspect of the administration before you start talking about tax reform and some other things. I feel what the government of the day is trying to do is to come up with fast policy that will make people want to see them putting measures or working. But at the end of the day, how do they get accountability for these decisions that they are making? Because they are making too many decisions, and at the end of the day, we are not seeing these decisions translate into something that we, as the common citizens of this country, we feel. Because the hardship is still ongoing. We are complaining. People are not really happy with the way things are going. So you coming with tax reform and the elements that are involved in this tax reform, they are not clear. That is the reason why the governors in the first instance, they said they are not clear with the stance. Then earlier, had a different position. Then now they are saying, okay, because of some clarification, they are now taking a different stance. But that shows that they have not even been able to clearly express to us what this reform is really all about, because it's more than just the surface that we see. What are the broader terms? What are the clauses that they are not made known to us now? Those are the things that we need to know. And when this reform comes on board, how much are we looking at that is going to revenue and generate for the common man? And how we are going to use whatever is coming out from this tax and reform? Those are the things we need to know. Accountability, because that is where we are really concerned with at the moment. I think, Windy, for now, that is all I would say.
Okay, thank you so much. During the town hall meeting, I think your delay made clear some of the tax reform, some of the things we have issues with. Because from what you're saying, you're pointing out that there are some gray areas. The northern governors
Yes.
were agitating, and now they are saying that if they had known, or some of them said if they had known about the 60%. Now, the new tax reform is saying that 60% is given to derivative, not where it's remitted. So it's more like pay as you earn, or you receive as you consume. That's what this new tax reform is giving to us. And then you also talked about the cost of governance being very expensive. In the new tax reform, be exempted from paying tax, and also tax will be removed, VAT will be removed from staple foods. Don't you think that's going to help unburden the governance, or at least make cost of living a lot better for Nigerians?
Yes, like I said, policy are good, you know, when you look at them from the surface. But there are so many things that goes into policies. And one of the things I mentioned, and we keep saying this, is implementation and accountability. Because it's easy for me and you to say, oh, this tax reform is beautiful and it will help the common man. But there are so many things that you must look that are not being discussed at the moment. Like if you look at us, for example, our data capture is poor. Some people are not even included in things that they ought to be included in terms of capturing the right proportion of persons who are supposed to be taxed. So, and now we are looking at a tax reform without putting consonants of all those things that are very integral to making the tax reforms a success. And I will say it again, whether you like it or not, you come up with the best tax reform. We need to know other things that are really important to us. One of such things is, what are you likely going to generate from this? There should be a projection from this tax reform. Where are you taking this revenue that you generate from this reform? Which area in our economy are you going to put back this money, resources, as the case may be, so that we can see it in real time, how the tax reform is affecting the common man. If you don't do that, it looks as if we keep telling you they are doing things, they come up with policy, but what of the accountability part and the clauses that are involved? There's always something to ask and something to clarify. I can tell you for a fact that in another few weeks from now, certain questions will be raised and you will hear them clarifying more things again. We need to see a broader document that clearly states the beginning and the end of this thing in black and white, so that they don't give us clauses that will confuse us. Then later on they will come and say, no, this is not what it's meant. Because like I said earlier, now you are talking about supply, you are talking about consumption. These are two different things. You can supply to a destination without having consumption in that destination. How do you account? And even when you say the state level, capturing the taxes in the state, do we have the appropriate means to do so? Because there's a lot more than meets the eye when you talk about this reform. And that is where I'm trying to point at, that we need to know more. I'm not saying the reform is not going to be positive, but what I'm saying is Nigerians at this point in time wants to see the beginning and the end of whatever you are offering them. And that remains my stand.
Okay. So you asked that what aspects of the economy is going to be improved. I know that the tax reform did make mention of the manufacturing sector, health sector, the education sector, and I think the agriculture too. So said the money, whatever revenue is generated, will be used to enhance the aspects of the economy. What exactly you want us to, you want the tax reform to state clearly, this is how much is going to be generated, this is what is going to be, even if they've already said that this money will go into the sector of the economy. You think that's still not good enough? Are you saying the reform lacks proper orientation and consultation like the northern governors are projecting?
I feel it lacks the needed consultation. I can't say proper, but I think we can do better with the startup of this reform. There are more stakeholders that should be involved in this discussion that will throw more light and give them more guidance to achieving a optimal reform. But like I would tell you, we are talking about the tax reform. You just mentioned education sector, you mentioned health. But there are certain principal things that affect us in Nigeria, like power is a sector that tends to affect the economic situation of things. We are looking at our roads are bad, and transport of goods and services is very important as well. Now, The railway is another aspect that can enhance commerce for us as a people. Utility is the call for taxes. That things are working very well. You need to have a tax reform that addresses things that will transform the economic life. Because I will say this again, if you don't affect the economic life, which is the common individual's pockets, because part of what tax does for people is to even provide an employment opportunity for them. If those things are not reflected alongside the reform, you are doing something that's not complete. Because like I keep saying, you need to have a reform that is heading towards a destination. And that destination is going to give answers to the problems and concerns of the people. If you tell me that this tax reform, you are giving me guarantee that you will improve the road networks, either railway or road, by 80, 70%, looking at the amount coming out from this reform. And this will happen in the next 1-2 years. Then we have a timeline to look at. We have the money revenue that we are generating from the reform. We also know the amount that will be set aside for the project that you have just listed. But if you say the tax reform, it will give us enough revenue to invest in health sector education, there's still no specifics. And now, at this point in time where we find ourselves, with the challenges globally we are facing, we want specifics. We want to know how much is being spent and the timeline so that we can hold the government accountable in the right proportion for whatever is being done. And that is what I keep saying. The average Nigerian needs to understand the beginning and the end. And time is fast spent. We are not having the luxury of time on our side. If that is not what we should be looking at, that means whatever we are saying at the moment, we are just speculating. And people will always have their skepticism about these things. So I want something that translates from just tax reform to this is the aftermath of the reform if it's implemented correctly. This is the revenue base we should be looking at. This is how it affects the common man. Look at the project, the key areas that are going to be addressed. Look at the money that is set aside for such areas. So this reform, this will take this period of time so that we can hold the government accountable. Because we have had government that will come 8 years. They will give promises. They will tell us they are coming with policy that will affect us. But we are not seeing results. And the result is what drives the common man. It's what makes life worthwhile for the common man. So that is my position, Windy.
Okay, so earlier you had said that some key players, some people that should be part of the reform are not part of it, some people that should study this document. Who are the people that you think have been neglected or isolated and not part of this reform system?
Okay, first, we are looking at the tax reform. And at the end of the day, the government agency that has discussed about the tax reform are more like the state governors and probably people within the government sector, if I'm not mistaken. But I've not seen a situation where people in the private sector are well and embraced in line of this whole reform discussion and all of that. And you know, some other thing that really strike my imagination, when things are going bad in our country, you hear of the NSC, they come on board and say they want to lay down tools and all of that. Is it that decisions like this, they are taking place in the absence of NSC having their input, so that we can say, tomorrow the reform don't come and they will say it's affecting workers? I don't know if you follow what I'm saying. Are they part of this discussion around this reform now? So that when the reform comes on board, they won't say, no, we disagree. Because if they are part of it at this point in time, there will be no basis for disagreement. And there are stakeholders like the people in the manufacturing sector, which is the private sector. Are they duly represented, or we are just using a few sample of people that will align with whatever they are saying to just draw the reform process and everything that follows? So these are the areas where I'm talking about stakeholders. Because I see that when you are looking at the reform is a broad thing. It's one of the major areas that most countries generate revenue to run their administration and everything. But who are the stakeholders that these reforms will affect? Are they part of the process so that everybody is part of what will make it work at the end of the day? So that is my concern as a citizen of Nigeria. That is just my concern. And if there are answers to this concern, then I will not be bothered. Because if I give you the impression that I know everything that the government is doing at the moment, I will be lying. I really don't know. That's why we're asking questions. And I feel strongly that many individuals out there are asking similar questions as myself.
Thank you so much, Mr. Benson. Okay, Senator Ali Ndume had argued that amongst other challenges that the northern leaders are having is the fact that this is not a good time for the tax reform, that the increase in tax is going to be extra burden on the already burdened Nigerians. What's your take on that argument?
Yes, he has his own perception of things, which I cannot critique. But what I will say is, why are we talking about the northern governors concerned? This is Nigeria. What of the southern governors? What of the eastern governors? What of the western governors? Are we operating in a different country? I think if we are looking at concerns, we should look at concerns from every aspect of the country, from the north, the west, the east, and the south. I know, yes, the governors in the north, they have their peculiarity and all of that, but so do the ones in the east, the south, and the west. If we have to respond to this reform from the various regions, I think the government of the day, they are the ones that is in charge of the administration of Nigeria as it stands. They should be able to get in touch with all the various regions, the governors in the various regions, and know their feedback so that they can speak in a very comprehensive manner. Now we are segmenting it to say the northern leaders. It looks as if we are not working together. I don't know if you understand, because are you saying what the concerns the northern governors doesn't concern the people in the east or the south? So I think the government of the day should avoid making segments out of this discussion and try to come to a place where everybody is together and we are taking feedback from everybody and we are giving a more detailed and comprehensive response to what the issues are. Because now, if we start to go into the segments, maybe tomorrow, after we have been able to sort the northern governors, their position, then we'll start looking at, okay, the west governors will come up with their own arguments and stance, and we start looking at, why not come together? We are Nigeria, we are one. And these are things that, they are little things that we don't pay attention to, but they really spark as far as our unity is concerned. So let's speak at once. Let's not segment by saying the northern governors and the eastern. Yes, though they have their concerns, but I think at the end of the day, we have to give a general, more comprehensive feedback that includes everybody, so nobody's clear.
Okay. Well, the reason we have the northern lawmakers on the spotlight is because so far they are the only ones that have come up to make or to declare their stance on the tax reform. The other regional governments or lawmakers are yet to say anything. And the northern lawmakers are saying that the tax reform is going to impoverish their region. That's why they have a challenge with that. So do you think that's a good bargain, or do you think their stance is actually right? You think the tax reform has the idea of impoverishing a particular region and enriching the others?
Fine. If their stand is to ensure their people are well protected and they are not exploited with the reform, then, of course, it's something they must stand by and defend their people. But we in the south or in the east, as the case may be, the west also, we have our concerns. What I want to see is, I want to see a situation where the government of the day, as much as they have been able to get feedback from the north, they should be at the forefront to get feedback from other regions. Governance is all about embracing and meeting with the people. Most times, the people is why you are there. So you need to meet them, get their feedback, and be at the forefront, because you have your timeline for which you are running the reform and everything you want to do around the reform. There's a timeline for it. So even if you don't need to wait, if the certain lawmakers are quiet, there are other people, the citizens in those areas, they are not quiet. I think it's high time they should look beyond just the lawmakers and go to stakeholders who are also part of the government and reach the people and get their feedback so that they can easily fine-tune the reform and address things properly. As for what the northern governors are saying, as long as it's for the interest of their people, there's nothing wrong there. But again, if you look at the north, in most cases, they have artisans, in the north more than in the south. And most of these artisans, that is the area where I mentioned earlier that data capturing becomes a challenge. because they are saying the threshold for the tax reform is about 1.5 million per annum. And some of these artisans, you see, they earn more than 1.5 per annum. So how do you capture them data-wise so that you can apply the tax reform to them? And these are the areas where you continuously see variance, and you always put things in the light that you are not clear enough to say you want to stand firm and say, yes, what the government are doing is proper, or they are doing it the right way. And if you notice, the first line of discussion I had with you was around this data capturing. Because whether you like it or not, there are artisans in their large numbers who earn more than 1.5 million per annum. But are we able to capture them rightly so that they can be reflected in this reform? So that would be a challenge in the North. And the North can use such situation to protect the interests of their people or bargain. But we need to look beyond that. It's also something we must look at from the South, despite the fact that we don't have that pool of artisans like they do. But we need to address this issue so that at the end of the day, we are looking at fairness and equity. So that should be at the forefront, and unity as we stand.
Okay, so finally, before we move away from the tax reform conversation, I want to ask, among other things, there is an agitation that the speed with which the federal government, there's an agitation that the federal government is mounting pressure on the National House of Assembly to pass this bill into law. The speed with which it is being processed, it has passed the second reading already in the Senate. Do you think there's an undertone as to why the federal government is so much in a hurry to enact this bill?
From economic standpoint, the government needs revenue increase because of its expenditure. They need money to run the government of the day. And money presently is a challenge, both in the public and in the private sector. So yes, if they are looking at what will come out of the tax reform, if it's something that will address most of their revenue challenges and needs, they will be in a hurry to let it fly. But at this point in time in the political dispensation of our history, I don't see the need to be in a hurry when you are taking decisions. What I believe in that we should make sure that due diligence is put in place first before any policy is implemented or passed through the various stages to become a policy. So why the pressure? Why in a hurry? There are so many reasons. Some are fundamental reasons. Some can be party-oriented or government of the day reasons. But at the end of the day, it's not about having a tax reform that matters. It's making sure that all what needs to be done are put in place. And when you implement, the reform will be successful. You must answer all the questions, all the clauses. You must look at everything. It's better to do due diligence and get it right than to be in a hurry and complicate things. So I just hope those of them in power look at things in a more objective manner and be patient to have the right things in place before pushing for implementation.